Sarah Martinez looked at her watch as she walked quickly through the courthouse doors. She was running late for her important meeting. Her black jeans and simple white shirt were not what she usually wore to work, but today had been different. Her daughter Emma had a school play that morning, and Sarah had promised to be there. The play had run longer than expected. Emma played a tree in the school's version of The Three Little Pigs, and she had been so proud. Sarah could not miss it. Being a working mother was hard, but missing her daughter's special moments was not something she was willing to do. After the play, Sarah had to rush straight to the courthouse. There was no time to go home and change into her usual work clothes. The meeting was too important to reschedule. They were going to talk about new security measures for the courthouse and budget changes that would affect everyone who worked there. As Sarah walked through the main hallway, she noticed how busy the courthouse was today. Lawyers in expensive suits walked past her, talking on their phones. Court clerks carried thick files from one office to another. Police officers stood near the metal detectors, watching people come and go. Sarah had worked in courthouses for over 15 years. She knew this building well. She had started as a young lawyer, fresh out of law school with big dreams and a desire to help people. Over the years, she had worked hard and earned respect in the legal community. Now she held one of the most important jobs in the county, but today, in her casual clothes and carrying only a small purse, Sarah looked like any other person who might be visiting the courthouse. She did not look like someone who worked there every day. She did not look like someone who made important decisions that affected thousands of people. As she turned the corner toward the elevator, Sarah heard a loud voice behind her. "Excuse me, young lady." Sarah turned around to see a tall, older white man in a black judge's robe walking toward her. His gray hair was perfectly combed, and his face showed the kind of authority that came from years of being in charge. Sarah recognized him immediately. It was Judge William Harrison, a man she had known by reputation for many years. Judge Harrison was known around the courthouse for two things. First, he was very strict in his courtroom. He did not like it when people were late, talked too loud, or dressed in ways he thought were wrong. Second, he had been a judge for over 20 years and believed that his experience made him better than most other people. "Yes," Sarah said politely, stopping to see what the judge wanted. Judge Harrison looked her up and down, his eyes stopping at her jeans and casual shirt. His face showed that he did not like what he saw. "Are you here for court today?" he asked in a voice that sounded like he was already angry. "I have business here, yes," Sarah replied calmly. "Business?" Judge Harrison repeated, his voice getting louder. "What kind of business brings you to my courthouse dressed like you're going to the mall?" Sarah felt a familiar feeling in her stomach. She had seen this kind of behavior before. She knew what was happening, but she decided to stay calm and see where this conversation would go. "I apologize if my clothing bothers you," Sarah said. "I had a family event this morning and came straight here." "A family event?" Judge Harrison laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. "Let me guess. Another court hearing for someone in your family? Another fine that needs to be paid? Another probation meeting?" Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "No, nothing like that." "Listen, miss," Judge Harrison said, taking a step closer to her. "I've been working in this courthouse for more than 20 years. I've seen thousands of people like you come through these doors. You all have the same story. You all think the rules don't apply to you." "I'm not sure what you mean," Sarah said. "I mean," Judge Harrison continued, "that you people need to learn some respect. This is a courthouse, not a playground. This is where serious business happens. This is where justice is served. And when you come here looking like you just rolled out of bed, you show disrespect to everyone who works here." Sarah could feel other people starting to notice their conversation. A few lawyers had stopped walking and were watching from a distance. A court clerk was pretending to organize papers while clearly listening to every word. "You people," Judge Harrison went on, "need to understand that there are rules in society. There are ways to behave when you're in important places like this, and the first rule is to dress properly and show respect." Sarah noticed that Judge Harrison kept saying, "You people." She knew exactly what he meant by those words, and it made her angry. But she had learned long ago that staying calm was often more powerful than showing anger. "I understand that you feel strongly about respect," Sarah said carefully, "and I agree that courthouses are important places." "Don't try to sweet-talk me," Judge Harrison snapped. "I've heard it all before. You probably don't even have a lawyer, do you? You probably think you can just walk in here and handle whatever legal trouble you're in by yourself. I didn't say I was in legal trouble, Sarah pointed out. You don't have to say it, Judge Harrison replied. It's written all over you. The way you dress, the way you talk, the way you carry yourself. I can spot someone who doesn't belong here from a mile away. More people were gathering now. Sarah could see lawyers, clerks, and even some police officers starting to pay attention to what was happening. She realized that this conversation was becoming a show, with Judge Harrison as the star and herself as the unwilling audience. Now, Judge Harrison continued, his voice getting even louder. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because this might be the most important advice anyone ever gives you. Sarah stood quietly, waiting to hear what the judge would say next. She was curious to see how far he would take this. She was also starting to think about what lessons could be learned from this moment, both for Judge Harrison and for everyone who was watching. The courthouse hallway had become very quiet except for Judge Harrison's voice. Even the usual sounds of phones ringing and people talking seemed to have stopped. Everyone wanted to hear what would happen next in this strange conversation between the well-dressed judge and the woman in jeans who had somehow caught his attention. Judge Harrison straightened his shoulders and looked down at Sarah with the kind of look teachers give to students who have misbehaved. He seemed to enjoy having an audience watching him give this lecture to someone he thought needed to learn a lesson. The first thing you need to understand, Judge Harrison began, speaking slowly like he was talking to a child, is that when you come to a courthouse, you are entering a place of law and order. This is not your neighborhood. This is not some casual place where you can act however you want. Sarah listened quietly, her hands folded in front of her. She had learned over the years that sometimes the best thing to do was let people show their true character. She was getting a very clear picture of Judge Harrison's character right now. Look around you, the judge continued, waving his hand at the marble walls and tall ceilings of the courthouse. Do you see how beautiful and important this building is? Do you see how the people who work here dress and behave? There's a reason for that. It's called respect. A young lawyer named David Chen was walking past when he heard Judge Harrison's loud voice. He stopped and moved closer, curious about what was happening. David had been practicing law for only 3 years, but he had heard stories about Judge Harrison's temper and his strong opinions about how people should behave in his courthouse. Respect, Judge Harrison repeated, pointing his finger at Sarah, is something that seems to be disappearing from our society, especially among certain groups of people who think the rules don't apply to them. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly when she heard certain groups of people, but she kept her expression calm. She had heard similar words many times before in her career, and she knew that getting angry would not help the situation. Now, I don't know what kind of trouble brought you here today, Judge Harrison went on, but I'm going to give you some free advice that might help you. First, get yourself a lawyer. Don't try to represent yourself. People like you always think they're smarter than they are, and you end up making things worse. David Chen felt uncomfortable listening to this. He wanted to say something, but he was young and Judge Harrison was powerful. David knew that judges could make life very difficult for lawyers who got on their bad side. Second, Judge Harrison continued, learn how to dress properly when you come to court. That means no jeans, no sneakers, no casual clothes. It means dressing like you understand that this is a serious place where serious things happen. Sarah noticed that more people were gathering. She could see Maria Santos, a court clerk who had worked in the building for 10 years. Maria looked worried about what she was seeing, but like David, she seemed afraid to interrupt a judge who was clearly on a mission. Third, Judge Harrison said, raising his voice even more, learn how to speak properly to judges and lawyers and other court officials. That means saying yes, Your Honor, and no, Your Honor. It means standing up when a judge enters the room. It means showing the respect that our positions deserve. An older lawyer named Robert Kim walked up to the group of people watching this scene. Robert had been practicing law for 30 years, and he had seen Judge Harrison behave this way before. But usually Judge Harrison saved his lectures for people who were actually in his courtroom, not for random people in the hallway. You see, Judge Harrison explained to his growing audience, this is exactly the kind of problem we have in our society today. People don't understand their place. They don't understand that there are rules and traditions that exist for good reasons. Sarah finally spoke up. What makes you think I don't understand rules and traditions? Judge Harrison seemed surprised that she had asked a question. He was used to people just listening quietly when he gave his speeches. "Look at yourself," he said. "Look at how you're dressed. Look at your attitude. Everything about you says that you don't take this place seriously. Everything about you says that you think you can just do whatever you want." "My attitude?" Sarah asked calmly. "Yes, your attitude," Judge Harrison replied. "You're standing there like you think you're equal to everyone else in this building. Like you think your opinions matter as much as the opinions of people who have studied law and dedicated their lives to justice." Robert Kim shifted uncomfortably. He had known many excellent lawyers who came from all different backgrounds, and he didn't like the direction this conversation was taking. "Let me tell you something," Judge Harrison said, warming up to his topic. "I've been a judge for over 20 years. I've seen every type of person you can imagine come through these doors. And I can tell you that success in the legal system comes from understanding respect, understanding tradition, and understanding your place in the order of things." Sarah nodded slowly. "And what place do you think that is?" "Your place," Judge Harrison said firmly, "is to listen to people who know more than you do. Your place is to follow the rules that have been established by people who are smarter and more experienced than you are. Your place is to show respect for institutions that are bigger and more important than your individual problems." Maria Santos looked around nervously. She could see that some people in the crowd were starting to look upset. She had never seen a judge talk to someone this way outside of a courtroom, and she wasn't sure if this was normal or if someone should do something about it. "Now," Judge Harrison continued, "I assume you're here because you or someone in your family is in some kind of legal trouble. That's usually why people like you end up in courthouses, and my advice to you is simple. Get a good lawyer, dress properly for court, and do exactly what you're told to do." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "People like me?" "Don't play games," Judge Harrison said impatiently. "You know exactly what I mean. People who don't understand how the system works. People who think they can just walk into a courthouse and expect to be treated like they belong here." David Chen felt his stomach turn. He had gone to law school because he believed in justice and fairness, and what he was seeing right now didn't seem fair at all. "The legal system," Judge Harrison announced to his audience, "works best when everyone understands their role. Judges make decisions, lawyers argue cases, and regular people follow the rules and show proper respect." Sarah looked around at all the people who were watching this conversation. She could see different expressions on their faces. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. Some looked like they agreed with what Judge Harrison was saying. "Is there anything else you'd like to teach me?" Sarah asked politely. Judge Harrison smiled, thinking that he had finally gotten through to her. "Yes, there is. The most important thing you can learn is humility. You need to understand that you don't know everything. You need to understand that other people have worked hard to get where they are, and they deserve your respect." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She was learning a lot from this conversation, but probably not the lessons that Judge Harrison thought he was teaching. Word traveled fast in the courthouse. Within minutes, news of Judge Harrison's public lecture had spread from person to person like wildfire. Court clerks whispered to each other as they walked past. Lawyers pulled out their phones and started recording. Police officers moved closer to see what was happening. Jennifer Walsh, a reporter who covered court cases for the local newspaper, had been in the building interviewing witnesses for a story. When she heard people talking about a judge giving someone a public scolding, she quickly made her way to the scene. Jennifer had covered enough courthouse drama to know that this could be an important story. "As I was saying," Judge Harrison continued, completely unaware that his audience was growing larger by the minute, respect for authority is something that seems to be lost on many people these days, especially younger people who think they know everything. Sarah noticed that at least 20 people were now watching their conversation. She could see phones being held up, recording everything that Judge Harrison was saying. She knew that whatever happened next would probably be seen by many more people than just those standing in the courthouse hallway. Detective Mike Rodriguez had been walking back to his office when he saw the crowd. As a police officer who worked closely with the court system, he knew most of the judges and lawyers in the building. He was surprised to see Judge Harrison having such a public conversation with someone who clearly wasn't a court employee. "You see," Judge Harrison said, gesturing toward the crowd that had gathered, "this is why these lessons are so important. Look at all these professional people who work here every day. They understand how to behave in a courthouse. They understand respect and proper conduct. Sarah looked at the faces in the crowd. She could see that many people looked uncomfortable with what they were hearing. Some were shaking their heads slightly. Others were whispering to each other with worried expressions. Lisa Thompson, a young public defender, pushed through the crowd to get a better view. Lisa had only been working in the courthouse for 6 months, but she had already heard stories about Judge Harrison's strong opinions and his tendency to lecture people. She had never seen him do it so publicly before. "The problem with society today," Judge Harrison announced loudly, clearly enjoying having such a large audience, "is that too many people think they deserve respect without earning it. They think they can dress however they want, act however they want, and speak however they want without any consequences." Jennifer Walsh started taking notes quickly. She could tell that this was going to be a story that people would want to read about. She had covered many cases in Judge Harrison's courtroom and knew that he had strong opinions, but she had never seen him express them quite like this. "Let me give you another piece of advice," Judge Harrison said to Sarah, pointing his finger at her again. "In this country, we have laws and we have order. Those laws and that order exist to protect society from chaos. And when people like you refuse to follow basic rules of respect and conduct, you threaten that order." Tom Bradley, an experienced criminal defense attorney, frowned as he listened to Judge Harrison's words. Tom had been practicing law for 15 years and had appeared before Judge Harrison many times. He knew the judge could be difficult, but this seemed different. This seemed personal. Sarah remained calm, but she was carefully watching the reactions of everyone around her. She could see that Judge Harrison's words were making many people uncomfortable. She could also see that some people were starting to recognize that something was very wrong with this situation. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, his voice getting even louder, "I want everyone here to understand what happens when people don't show proper respect for our legal system. They end up in trouble. They end up facing consequences that could have been avoided if they had just learned to follow the rules." A court stenographer named Rachel Kim had been walking to her next assignment when she saw the crowd. Rachel had worked in courthouses for 12 years and had seen many strange things, but she had never seen a judge give such a public lecture to someone in the hallway. "This young lady," Judge Harrison said, gesturing toward Sarah, "is a perfect example of what's wrong with people today. She comes into our courthouse dressed like she's going to a casual restaurant. She acts like she belongs here just as much as people who have spent years studying law and working in the legal profession." David Chen pulled out his phone and started recording. He felt like something important was happening, and he wanted to make sure there was a record of it. Several other people in the crowd were doing the same thing, and when I try to educate her about proper courthouse behavior, Judge Harrison went on, she stands there with an attitude like she thinks she knows better than a judge who has been serving justice for over 20 years. Sarah noticed that more court employees were joining the crowd. She could see bailiffs, clerks, lawyers, and other people who worked in the building every day. Many of them looked shocked by what they were seeing. "Let me tell all of you something," Judge Harrison announced to the entire crowd, spreading his arms wide like he was giving a speech. "This is exactly why we need to maintain standards in our courthouses. This is exactly why we need to make sure that people understand the difference between those who belong here and those who are just visiting." Detective Rodriguez felt increasingly uncomfortable as he listened to Judge Harrison's words. As a police officer, he had worked with people from all backgrounds, and he didn't like the tone he was hearing from the judge. "Those who belong here," Judge Harrison continued, "are people who have earned their place through education, hard work, and dedication to justice. Those who are just visiting need to show proper respect and follow our rules, or they need to leave." Jennifer Walsh looked around at the crowd and could see that many people were becoming upset. She could tell that this story was going to be bigger than just a simple courthouse incident. "Now," Judge Harrison said, turning back to Sarah, "I hope you've learned something from this conversation. I hope you understand that when you come to a courthouse, you need to dress properly, speak respectfully, and remember that you are a guest in our house of justice." Sarah looked at Judge Harrison calmly. Then she looked at the crowd of people who were watching and listening to everything that was being said. She could see phones recording, people taking notes, and faces showing various emotions from anger to embarrassment to curiosity. "Is there anything else you'd like to teach me?" Sarah asked quietly. Judge Harrison smiled widely, thinking that he had successfully educated not just Sarah, but everyone who was watching. He felt proud of the lesson he had given and the example he had set. "Just remember what I've told you," he said confidently. "Remember that respect is earned, and that some people have earned more respect than others. Remember your place and you'll do just fine." The crowd had grown to over 30 people now, and the hallway was getting crowded. Some people were trying to get closer to see better, while others were stepping back to make phone calls or send text messages about what they had just witnessed. Sarah nodded slowly and looked around at all the faces watching her. She knew that this moment was about to change, and she knew that everyone present was about to learn something very important about making assumptions and treating people with respect. Sarah took a deep breath and looked directly at Judge Harrison. Despite everything he had said to her, despite the way he had spoken about her in front of all these people, she remained calm. This was not the first time in her career that someone had made wrong assumptions about her, and she knew it would not be the last. Over the years, Sarah had learned that how she responded to situations like this was just as important as what was being said to her. She had learned that staying calm and professional often taught better lessons than getting angry or defensive. "Thank you for sharing your thoughts with me," Sarah said politely to Judge Harrison. Her voice was steady and respectful, which seemed to surprise some people in the crowd who expected her to be upset or angry. Judge Harrison looked pleased with her response. He thought that his lecture had worked and that he had successfully taught this young woman how to behave properly in a courthouse. "You're welcome," he said with a satisfied smile. "I hope you remember these lessons the next time you have to come to court." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She was thinking about many things as she stood there surrounded by all these people. She was thinking about her 15 years of experience in courtrooms just like this one. She was thinking about all the cases she had handled and all the difficult situations she had faced in her career. She was also thinking about the conversation she had planned to have with Judge Harrison today. They were supposed to meet in his office in 10 minutes to discuss new security measures for the courthouse. It was an important meeting that had been scheduled weeks ago. Detective Rodriguez watched Sarah's calm reaction and felt impressed. In his years as a police officer, he had seen many people respond to public criticism with anger or embarrassment. But this woman seemed completely composed, even after being lectured so harshly in front of so many people. "I'm curious about something," Sarah said to Judge Harrison. "You mentioned that you can tell who belongs in a courthouse and who doesn't. What exactly do you look for when you make that decision?" Judge Harrison seemed happy to answer this question. He thought it showed that Sarah was finally taking his advice seriously and wanted to learn more. "Well," he began, straightening his judge's robe, "it's really quite simple. You look at how people dress, how they speak, how they carry themselves. You look at whether they show proper respect for authority and whether they understand courthouse procedures." Sarah listened carefully to his answer. She was getting a very clear picture of how Judge Harrison viewed people, and she was starting to understand why some people in the courthouse had complained about him in the past. Lisa Thompson, the young public defender, felt her heart racing as she listened to this conversation. She had gone to law school because she believed that everyone deserved fair treatment in the legal system, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. What she was hearing from Judge Harrison seemed to go against everything she believed in. "And you feel confident that you can make these judgments just by looking at someone?" Sarah asked. "Absolutely," Judge Harrison replied. "When you've been in this business as long as I have, you develop an eye for these things. You learn to read people very quickly." Sarah nodded again. She was thinking about all the times in her career when people had read her incorrectly. She remembered being a young lawyer and having opposing attorneys underestimate her because of her age or her appearance. She remembered judges who had assumed she was less experienced or less capable than her male colleagues. Tom Bradley, the experienced defense attorney, was starting to feel very uncomfortable with the direction of this conversation. He had seen Judge Harrison in court many times, and he was beginning to wonder if the judge brought these same attitudes into his courtroom when he was making decisions about people's lives. "Can I ask you another question?" Sarah said politely. "Of course," Judge Harrison replied, still feeling confident about the impression he was making on his audience. "In your experience, have you ever been wrong about someone? Have you ever made assumptions about a person that turned out to be incorrect?" Judge Harrison paused for a moment. This was not the kind of question he had expected, and it made him think about situations he preferred not to remember. "Well," he said slowly, "I suppose everyone makes mistakes occasionally, But in general, I trust my instincts about people. They've served me well over the years. Sarah could see that Judge Harrison was starting to feel slightly less confident, but he was still convinced that he was right about her and about his ability to judge people accurately. Jennifer Walsh continued taking notes, realizing that this conversation was revealing important information about how at least one judge in the courthouse viewed people who came before him. She knew that this could have serious implications for the fairness of the legal system. "I appreciate your honesty," Sarah said. "It's interesting to hear your perspective on these issues." Judge Harrison seemed to regain his confidence when he heard this. He thought that Sarah was genuinely impressed by his wisdom and experience. "You know," he said, looking around at the crowd, "this has actually been a very good example for everyone here. This young lady came into our courthouse unprepared and inappropriately dressed, but she was willing to listen and learn from someone with more experience." Sarah almost smiled when she heard this, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. She was amazed by how confident Judge Harrison remained in his assumptions about her, even after talking with her for several minutes. David Chen looked at his phone and realized that he had been recording for almost 10 minutes. He couldn't believe that Judge Harrison was continuing to make these kinds of statements with so many people watching and recording. "I think," Judge Harrison announced to the crowd, "that this has been a valuable lesson for everyone. It shows the importance of maintaining standards and helping people understand how to behave properly in our legal system." Rachel Kim, the court stenographer, shook her head slightly as she listened to Judge Harrison's words. In her 12 years of courthouse experience, she had seen many examples of good judgment and bad judgment. This seemed like a clear example of bad judgment. Sarah looked around at all the faces in the crowd. She could see a wide range of emotions: embarrassment, anger, curiosity, and discomfort. She could also see that many people were still recording with their phones. She knew that in a few minutes Judge Harrison would discover his mistake. She knew that this conversation would become a teaching moment, not just for him but for everyone who was watching. And she knew that how she handled the next few minutes would be remembered by everyone present. "Judge Harrison," Sarah said calmly, "I wonder if we should continue this conversation in a more private setting." "Nonsense," Judge Harrison replied. "I think this public discussion has been very beneficial. Sometimes people need to hear these lessons in front of others so they understand how serious they are." Sarah nodded one more time. She had given Judge Harrison every opportunity to end this conversation gracefully, but he had chosen to continue. Now everyone present would learn exactly how dangerous it could be to make assumptions about people based on their appearance. Janet Phillips had been the court administrator for 8 years, and she prided herself on knowing everything that happened in her courthouse. When her assistant rushed into her office and told her that Judge Harrison was having a very public argument with someone in the main hallway, Janet immediately left her desk to see what was happening. As Janet walked quickly toward the crowd, she could hear Judge Harrison's loud voice echoing through the marble hallway. She could see people with phones recording whatever was going on. Her heart started beating faster, because she knew that anything involving a judge could quickly become a problem for the entire courthouse. When Janet pushed through the crowd and saw who Judge Harrison was talking to, her face went completely white. She felt sick to her stomach. She knew exactly who Sarah Martinez was, and she knew that Judge Harrison was making a terrible mistake. Janet had worked with Sarah many times over the years. She knew Sarah's reputation, her accomplishments, and her importance in the county's legal system. She also knew that Sarah was supposed to meet with Judge Harrison in his office in just a few minutes. "Judge Harrison," Janet said quietly, trying to get his attention, without making a scene, but Judge Harrison was too focused on his lecture to notice Janet. He was enjoying the attention from the crowd, and the feeling that he was teaching important lessons about respect and proper behavior. "As I was saying," Judge Harrison continued, "it's crucial that people understand the difference between those who have earned their place in the legal system and those who are just passing through." Janet tried again, moving closer to Judge Harrison and speaking a little louder. "Your Honor, could I speak with you for a moment?" This time Judge Harrison heard her, but he waved her away with his hand. "Not now, Janet. I'm in the middle of an important conversation here." Janet felt panic rising in her chest. She knew that every second this conversation continued was making things worse. She looked at Sarah, hoping to catch her eye and somehow communicate that she should reveal who she was. Sarah noticed Janet's distressed expression and gave her a small, subtle nod. It was the kind of look that said, "I know what's happening, and I'm handling it." Sarah wanted to see how far Judge Harrison would take this situation before he learned the truth. "You see, Janet," Judge Harrison said, turning slightly toward the court administrator, "this is exactly the kind of situation where courthouse staff need to support judges in maintaining proper standards." Janet felt like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. She knew it was going to be terrible, but she couldn't stop it from happening. Detective Rodriguez had been watching Janet's reaction, and he could tell that something was very wrong. Janet looked like someone who had just seen something horrible happen. Her face was pale, and she kept trying to get Judge Harrison's attention. "Judge Harrison," Janet tried one more time, her voice more urgent now. "I really need to speak with you right away. It's very important." "Whatever it is can wait," Judge Harrison replied firmly. "Right now I'm providing a valuable education to this young lady and to everyone else who's watching." Tom Bradley was standing close enough to hear Janet's attempts to interrupt, and he could see how worried she looked. Tom had worked with Janet for many years and had never seen her look so upset about anything. Sarah watched this interaction between Judge Harrison and Janet with great interest. She could see that Janet was trying to prevent what was about to happen, but Judge Harrison was too confident in his own assumptions to listen to anyone else. "Let me tell you something else," Judge Harrison said, turning back to Sarah. "One of the most important things about our legal system is that it operates on facts, not on feelings or opinions. When you come to court, what matters is evidence and law, not what you think is fair or unfair." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's very true. Facts are extremely important in the legal system." "Exactly," Judge Harrison said, pleased that Sarah seemed to understand this point. "And the fact is that some people in our society have earned positions of authority and respect through hard work and dedication. Those people deserve to be treated differently than people who haven't put in that same effort." Jennifer Walsh looked up from her notes and noticed that Janet Phillips looked like she was about to be sick. Jennifer had covered enough courthouse stories to know that when the court administrator looked that worried, something big was about to happen. "Judge Harrison," Janet tried one final time, her voice almost desperate now, "please, I really need to interrupt this conversation." But Judge Harrison had become completely focused on his audience and his message. He seemed to think that backing down now would make him look weak in front of all these people. "Janet, I appreciate your concern," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "But sometimes courthouse administrators need to trust judges to handle situations appropriately. This is exactly the kind of teachable moment that can benefit everyone." Janet closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She knew there was nothing more she could do to stop what was about to happen. Judge Harrison had been given multiple chances to end this conversation, and he had refused all of them. Lisa Thompson noticed that several other courthouse employees were starting to look very uncomfortable. She could see people whispering to each other and pointing at Janet's worried expression. Something was definitely wrong with this situation. "Now," Judge Harrison announced to the crowd, "I want everyone to remember what you've seen here today. You've seen how important it is to maintain respect for our legal institutions. You've seen how people need to be educated about proper courthouse behavior." Sarah looked around at all the faces watching this scene. She could see court clerks, lawyers, police officers, reporters, and other people who worked in or visited the courthouse regularly. Many of them looked confused about why Judge Harrison was continuing this very public lecture. "You've also seen," Judge Harrison continued, "how someone can benefit from listening to advice from people who have more experience and knowledge. This young lady has shown that she's willing to learn, which is more than I can say for many people who come through our doors." David Chen looked at his phone and realized that he now had almost 15 minutes of video recorded. He couldn't believe that Judge Harrison was still talking, and he wondered when this conversation would finally end. "Most importantly," Judge Harrison said, building up to what he thought would be his final point, "you've seen that our legal system works best when everyone understands their proper role and behaves accordingly." Sarah could see that Janet was looking at her with an expression that seemed to say, "Please just tell him who you are and end this." But Sarah had decided that Judge Harrison needed to learn this lesson completely. She wanted him to understand exactly what could happen when someone made assumptions about other people. "Judge Harrison," Sarah said calmly, "you've certainly given me a lot to think about." "Good," Judge Harrison replied with a big smile. "That was exactly my intention. I hope this conversation helps you in whatever legal matter brought you here today. Sarah looked at her watch. It was now past the time when she and Judge Harrison were supposed to start their scheduled meeting. She knew that his secretary would soon be wondering where he was. Actually, Sarah said, I think it's time for us to continue this conversation in a different setting. Sarah Martinez took a step forward and looked directly at Judge Harrison. The crowd around them had grown quiet, sensing that something important was about to happen. Even Judge Harrison seemed to notice that the atmosphere had changed, though he still had no idea why. Judge Harrison, Sarah said in a clear, strong voice that carried easily through the marble hallway, I think it's time for us to properly introduce ourselves. Judge Harrison looked confused. I'm sorry? My name is Sarah Martinez, she said, speaking loud enough for everyone in the crowd to hear clearly. I am the district attorney for this county. The silence that followed was so complete that people could hear their own heartbeats. Judge Harrison's confident smile disappeared from his face as if someone had turned off a light switch. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I believe, Sarah continued calmly, that we have a meeting scheduled in your office right now to discuss courthouse security improvements and budget allocations for the coming year. Judge Harrison's face went through several different colors in the space of a few seconds. First it was pale white, then it turned red, then it seemed to go gray. He looked like someone who had just been told that everything he thought he knew about the world was wrong. The crowd began to react. David Chen almost dropped his phone. Lisa Thompson put her hand over her mouth. Detective Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. Tom Bradley closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead, knowing that he had just witnessed something that would be talked about in the courthouse for years. Judge Harrison started to say, but he couldn't finish the sentence. I'm the district attorney, Sarah repeated patiently. I've held this position for 6 years. Before that, I was an assistant district attorney for 9 years. I graduated from Stanford Law School, and I've been practicing law for 15 years. Jennifer Walsh was writing as fast as she could, knowing that she was witnessing one of the biggest courthouse stories of her career. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Janet Phillips felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that the truth was finally coming out, and horror at what this would mean for Judge Harrison and for the courthouse's reputation. But you're dressed, Judge Harrison stammered, looking at Sarah's jeans and casual shirt. I came directly from my daughter's school play, Sarah explained. As I mentioned earlier, I had a family event this morning. Emma played a tree in The Three Little Pigs, and I promised her I would be there. The crowd was starting to murmur now. People were looking at each other with expressions of shock and disbelief. Some were shaking their heads. Others were still staring at Judge Harrison, waiting to see how he would respond. District Attorney Martinez, Judge Harrison said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea. No, Sarah agreed. You didn't. And that's exactly the problem. Sarah looked around at all the people who had gathered to watch this conversation. She could see lawyers, court clerks, police officers, reporters, and other courthouse staff. All of them had just learned something important about making assumptions about people. For the past 20 minutes, Sarah said, her voice still calm but now carrying the authority of her position, you have lectured me about respect, about knowing my place, about understanding how the legal system works, and about the difference between people who belong in this courthouse and people who don't. Judge Harrison looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. You told me that people like me need to learn. Respect, Sarah continued. You said that you could tell just by looking at me that I was in some kind of legal trouble. You assumed that I didn't have a lawyer, and that I didn't understand courthouse procedures. Tom Bradley felt sick to his stomach as he remembered everything Judge Harrison had said. He was thinking about all the times he had appeared before Judge Harrison in court, and wondering if the judge had made similar assumptions about his clients. You also said, Sarah went on, that our legal system works on facts, not feelings or opinions. So let me share some facts with you. The hallway was so quiet that people could hear the air conditioning system running in the background. Fact number 1, Sarah said, holding up one finger. I have prosecuted over 200 felony cases in my career. Fact number 2, I have a conviction rate of over 90%. Fact number 3, I have been elected district attorney twice by the people of this county. Judge Harrison's face was now completely red. He looked around at the crowd, seeming to realize for the first time that dozens of people had recorded his entire lecture. Fact number 4, Sarah continued. I supervise 43 attorneys and a staff of over 100 people. Fact number 5, I work with judges, police officers, and other law enforcement officials every single day to ensure that justice is served fairly and appropriately in our county. Detective Rodriguez found himself nodding as he listened to Sarah list her qualifications. He had worked with the district attorney's office many times and knew their reputation for professionalism and competence. And fact number 6, Sarah said, looking directly at Judge Harrison, I came to this courthouse today specifically to meet with you about important issues affecting the safety and operation of this building. Judge Harrison finally found his voice. Though it was shaky and uncertain, District Attorney Martinez, I sincerely apologize. I had no idea who you were. But that's exactly the point, Sarah replied. You had no idea who I was, but you were absolutely certain that you knew everything about me, based on my appearance and your assumptions. The crowd was listening to every word. Many people were still recording with their phones, knowing that this conversation would be shared far beyond the courthouse walls. You were certain that I was in legal trouble, Sarah said. You were certain that I didn't understand how courthouses work. You were certain that I needed to be educated about respect and proper behavior, and you were certain about all of these things without ever asking who I was or why I was here. Judge Harrison nodded miserably. You're absolutely right. I made terrible assumptions, and I was completely wrong. Yes, Sarah agreed. You were wrong. But the bigger question is, if you can make such confident assumptions about me when I'm standing right in front of you, how many wrong assumptions do you make about people who appear in your courtroom? This question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Everyone present understood that Sarah had just raised one of the most important issues in the entire legal system, the danger of judges making decisions based on biases and assumptions rather than facts and evidence. Judge Harrison had no answer to her question. He just stood there, looking smaller and less important than he had 20 minutes ago, realizing that everything had changed. The first video appeared on social media within an hour. David Chen had uploaded his recording to his personal social media account with the caption, Judge lectures woman about courthouse respect, doesn't realize she's the district attorney. Within minutes, the video had been shared dozens of times. By lunchtime, the story was spreading across multiple platforms. Someone had created a shorter version of the video that focused on the most embarrassing moments of Judge Harrison's lecture, followed immediately by Sarah's calm revelation of her identity. This version was shared hundreds of times. Judge Harrison had retreated to his office immediately after the hallway confrontation, canceling all his afternoon court sessions. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, had worked for him for 12 years and had never seen him look so upset and embarrassed. Mrs. Patterson, Judge Harrison said quietly, please hold all my calls for the rest of the day. And if anyone from the media contacts this office, tell them I have no comment. But the media was already calling. Jennifer Walsh had returned to her newspaper office and was working on a story that would be published online within hours. She had also shared the basic details with other reporters, and news outlets throughout the region were starting to pick up the story. Sarah Martinez returned to her office in the district attorney's building, which was connected to the courthouse by an underground tunnel. Her staff could tell immediately that something significant had happened, but Sarah asked them to hold her calls while she thought about how to handle the situation. Sarah's assistant, Maria Gonzalez, knocked on her door after an hour. Ms. Martinez, you're getting calls from reporters, and there are some videos online that people are asking about. Sarah sighed and asked Maria to bring her laptop. When she saw the videos that were already circulating online, she realized that this story was going to be much bigger than just courthouse gossip. The phone in Sarah's office rang constantly for the rest of the afternoon. Reporters from local news stations wanted interviews. Legal experts wanted her comments about bias in the judicial system. Community leaders wanted to know what she planned to do about Judge Harrison's behavior. Meanwhile, Judge Harrison was discovering that hiding in his office was not going to protect him from the consequences of his public lecture. His phone was also ringing constantly, and people were posting comments about the videos that mentioned him by name. By 3 p.m., the story had reached the local television news stations. Channel 7 News was preparing a story for their evening broadcast, and they had reached out to both Sarah and Judge Harrison for comments. Judge Harrison's office declined to comment, but Sarah agreed to a brief interview. Tom Bradley was in his law office when his paralegal showed him one of the videos on her phone. "Oh no," Tom said immediately. "This is going to be a disaster for him." Tom had appeared before Judge Harrison many times over the years, and he knew that the judge's behavior in the video was not out of character. Tom started thinking about some of his past cases and wondering if Judge Harrison's obvious biases had affected his decisions in court. Detective Rodriguez was having similar thoughts at the police station. He had worked with Judge Harrison on many cases, and the judge's attitudes shown in the video made him uncomfortable about some of the sentences and rulings he had witnessed. Lisa Thompson, the young public defender, was talking with her supervisor about the video when she had a disturbing realization. "I've had 3 cases before Judge Harrison in the past 6 months," she said. "All 3 of my clients were young people of color, and all 3 received harsher sentences than I expected." Her supervisor, an experienced public defender named Robert Chen, nodded grimly. "We need to review all recent cases that went before Judge Harrison's court. If he's been making decisions based on the kind of biases we saw in that video, we may have grounds for appeals." By evening, the story had reached the state capitol. The State Judicial Conduct Board, which was responsible for investigating complaints against judges, had received over 50 emails about Judge Harrison's behavior. Board members were watching the videos and discussing whether to open a formal investigation. Sarah's interview with Channel 7 News was professional and measured. She did not attack Judge Harrison personally, but she spoke clearly about the importance of treating all people with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. "What happened today was unfortunate," Sarah told the reporter, "but it provides an important opportunity to discuss bias in our legal system. Every person who enters a courthouse deserves to be treated fairly, whether they're wearing jeans or a business suit." The reporter asked Sarah if she planned to file a complaint against Judge Harrison. "I think Judge Harrison's behavior speaks for itself," Sarah replied. "The more important question is what we can all learn from this incident to make our legal system more fair and respectful for everyone." But other people were not as diplomatic as Sarah. Social media was full of angry comments about Judge Harrison's behavior. People were sharing their own stories about being treated unfairly by judges and court officials. The hashtag #Courthouse Respect was trending by evening. Janet Phillips, the court administrator, spent the entire afternoon in emergency meetings with courthouse supervisors and the chief judge. They were trying to figure out how to handle the publicity and what steps needed to be taken to address Judge Harrison's behavior. "This is the worst courthouse incident we've ever had," the chief judge said during one of the meetings. "The videos are everywhere and people are asking serious questions about bias in our courts." By the end of the day, Judge Harrison's behavior had become a major news story throughout the region. Legal experts were being interviewed about judicial bias. Community groups were calling for reforms in the court system. And courthouse employees were having uncomfortable conversations about attitudes and assumptions they had seen from various judges over the years. Judge Harrison sat alone in his office as darkness fell, realizing that his 20-year career as a judge was probably over. His wife had called him after seeing the videos online, and she was devastated by the embarrassment this would bring to their family. Sarah Martinez went home to her daughter Emma, who was excited to tell her mother all about the school play. Emma had no idea that her mother's day had become much more complicated after the play ended. As Sarah listened to Emma talk about being a tree, she thought about the lessons that would come from this day's events. She hoped that Judge Harrison would learn something important about treating people with respect. But more importantly, she hoped that everyone who saw the videos would think more carefully about their own assumptions and biases. The story was far from over. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more investigations, and more difficult conversations about fairness and justice in the legal system. But Sarah felt confident that something good could come from this embarrassing incident if people were willing to learn from it. 3 months after the courthouse incident, Judge William Harrison sat in a small conference room facing the State Judicial Conduct Board. The formal hearing had lasted 2 days, and now the 5-member board was ready to announce their decision. "Judge Harrison," said Board Chairman Margaret Foster, "after reviewing all the evidence, including video recordings and witness testimony, This board finds that your conduct violated several principles of judicial ethics, including the requirement to treat all people with dignity and respect. Judge Harrison's lawyer had argued that his client's behavior, while inappropriate, did not rise to the level requiring removal from the bench. But the board disagreed. Your actions demonstrated clear bias and prejudice, Chairman Foster continued, and they brought discredit to the entire judicial system. Therefore, this board is suspending you from judicial duties for 6 months without pay, requiring you to complete 40 hours of bias awareness training, and placing you on probation for 2 years. Judge Harrison accepted the punishment without comment. He knew he was lucky to keep his job at all. Many people had called for his complete removal from the bench. The bias awareness training turned out to be more challenging than Judge Harrison had expected. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a professor of psychology and law, led the program that Judge Harrison was required to attend. The problem, Dr. Rodriguez explained to the group of judges and other court officials in the training session, is not that you consciously decided to treat people unfairly. The problem is that unconscious biases affect all of us, and people in positions of power have a special responsibility to recognize and control these biases. Judge Harrison found himself thinking about dozens of cases from his 20-year career. He remembered defendants who had appeared in his courtroom wearing casual clothes or speaking with accents, and he wondered if his assumptions about those people had affected his decisions. Meanwhile, Sarah Martinez had used the incident as an opportunity to create positive changes throughout the county's legal system. She worked with the chief judge and the court administrator to establish new policies and training programs for all courthouse employees. Every person who works in our courthouse, Sarah announced at a staff meeting, will participate in annual bias awareness training. We will also create clear guidelines for how all courthouse visitors should be treated, regardless of their appearance or background. The training programs were led by Dr. Rodriguez and other experts who specialized in understanding how unconscious bias affects decision-making. The sessions were required for judges, lawyers, court clerks, bailiffs, and security guards. Lisa Thompson, the young public defender, had used the 3 months since the incident to review cases that had been decided by Judge Harrison. Working with a team of law students and volunteer attorneys, she identified 17 cases where defendants might have received unfair treatment. We found patterns, Lisa reported to her supervisor. Defendants who were young, minority, or poorly dressed consistently received harsher sentences than defendants with similar charges who were older, white, or well-dressed. These findings led to appeals in several cases. 3 defendants had their sentences reduced, and 2 had their convictions overturned entirely when appeals courts found evidence of judicial bias. The courthouse incident had also inspired changes beyond the local legal system. Law schools throughout the state began using the video recordings as teaching tools to help future lawyers understand the importance of recognizing bias. Professor James Wilson at the State University's law school showed the videos to his ethics in law class every semester. This incident, he told his students, demonstrates how quickly assumptions can lead to unfair treatment. As future lawyers and judges, you must constantly examine your own biases and work to ensure that justice is truly blind. Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had covered the original incident, won a state journalism award for her follow-up stories about bias in the legal system. Her reporting had encouraged other victims of judicial bias to share their experiences, leading to reforms in courthouses throughout the region. Detective Rodriguez had become an advocate for bias awareness training in police departments. If judges can have unconscious biases, he told his fellow officers, then police officers can too. We need to be honest about this and work to do better. The changes were not just limited to the legal system. The videos from the courthouse incident had been viewed millions of times online, and they had sparked conversations about bias and assumptions in workplaces, schools, and communities throughout the country. Dr. Rodriguez often used the incident as an example in her research and teaching. What made this case so powerful, she explained to other researchers, was not just that the judge made wrong assumptions. It was that those assumptions were based on deeply held biases about who belongs in positions of power and who doesn't. A year after the incident, Judge Harrison returned to the bench. He was a changed person. The bias awareness training and the public embarrassment had forced him to examine his attitudes and behavior in ways he had never done before. In his first case after returning to work, Judge Harrison was careful to treat every person in his courtroom with respect and dignity. He listened more carefully to defendants and their lawyers. He asked more questions before making decisions. And he constantly reminded himself that his assumptions about people could be wrong. Sarah Martinez continued to serve as district attorney, and her handling of the courthouse incident had increased her reputation throughout the state. Legal organizations invited her to speak about bias and fairness in the justice system. The most important lesson from that day, Sarah often told audiences, is that we all have biases, but we can choose how to respond when those biases are revealed. We can get defensive and make excuses, or we can use the experience to learn and improve. Emma Martinez, now a year older, still sometimes asked her mother about the day she became famous.
"Mommy, why did that man think you were in trouble just because you wore jeans?"
Sarah always gave her daughter the same answer. Some people make assumptions about other people based on how they look or dress. But what's important is that we treat everyone with kindness and respect, no matter what they look like. The courthouse where the incident occurred became a model for other court systems throughout the country. Visitors often came to see the bias awareness programs and fair treatment policies that had been implemented after the Judge Harrison incident. Janet Phillips, the court administrator, kept a framed copy of the new courthouse policies on her wall. The policies began with a simple statement: every person who enters this courthouse deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or reason for being here. 5 years after the incident, Dr. Rodriguez published a research study about the long-term effects of the courthouse reforms. She found that complaints about unfair treatment had decreased by 60%, and surveys showed that people felt more confident that they would be treated fairly in the courthouse. Judge Harrison, now nearing retirement, often reflected on the day that changed his career and his life. He realized that the public embarrassment had been painful but necessary. It had forced him to become a better judge and a better person. The video recordings of the courthouse incident continued to be watched and discussed years later. They served as a permanent reminder that everyone, no matter how powerful or experienced, could learn important lessons about treating others with respect and avoiding harmful assumptions. Sarah Martinez's calm and professional response to Judge Harrison's lecture became a model for how to handle unfair treatment with dignity. Leadership training programs throughout the country used her example to teach people how to respond to bias and discrimination effectively. The incident had started as an embarrassing mistake by one judge, but it had become a catalyst for positive change that affected thousands of people. It proved that even painful experiences could lead to important improvements in how people treat each other, especially in institutions that are supposed to represent justice and fairness for everyone.